Hello and a very warm welcome to this edition of Public Forum. In the show today, a look at India's diplomacy with China and the US. China and India held their upgraded strategic dialogue last week to shore up bilateral ties. Since 2015, China-India strategic and cooperative partnership for peace and prosperity has grown. The two countries have set the goal of forging a closer development partnership, made new progress in exchanges and cooperation in various areas, and stayed in close communication on regional and international issues. But the politics globally is evolving, and the closeness or differences between these two Asian giants will influence international economy and the world order. So where do China-India relations stand today? What lies ahead in future, especially in an extremely volatile global situation? We discuss it in Public Forum today. Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar met Chinese diplomat State Councillor Yang Jiechi last week for the first strategic dialogue between the two countries. China and India held their upgraded strategic dialogue to shore up bilateral ties. Though nothing much could be achieved on the issues, such as Beijing's reluctance to support India's nuclear suppliers group bid, as well as UN ban on Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Masood Azhar. India explained its rationale to China on the listing of Azhar under UN Sanctions Committee. At the end of the discussion, there was an understanding on how India and China can cooperate in capacity building in Afghanistan. Besides, leaders also reflected on Africa, Iran and related international political situation. Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar also met Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Executive Vice Foreign Minister Zhang Yesu, and also touched the situation evolving in the US after President Donald Trump took office. This strategic dialogue is the latest among over 30 dialogue mechanisms to have emerged over the years between the two countries in diverse areas. And India and China have had a strategic partnership, specifically a strategic and cooperative partnership for peace and prosperity since 2005. But analysts believe that there are no true areas of strategic convergence which has taken place. For India, China's closeness with Pakistan, especially on matters of defense, is also a key concern. So some issues and some questions we delve into are that how significant was Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar's visit to China? What does a strategic relationship between the two countries look like? What are its driving factors and core objectives? How can India rebalance the Pakistan-China axis? And more importantly, what are the challenges for the emerging US-China-India triangle, especially under the Trump leadership? And to talk more on this, I'm joined by Ambassador Yogendra Kumar on the panel, and also Dr. Sriram Chaulia, who's Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs, joined me on the panel. Welcome to the program. We'll begin the discussion with you, Ambassador Kumar. How significant do you think was S. Jaishankar's visit to China, though there had been those very contentious issues on Masood Azhar and India's NSG bid, which remain till date contentious, but how significant otherwise was it?
Well, the visit actually was significant because for the first time you might say, as it says, there is structured strategic dialogue, that at the level of the heads of foreign offices, there was really a structured discussion. That is that the Foreign Secretary covered the overall gamut of the relationship in the current strategic context, and he had taken with him a team of special senior officers who actually discussed with the Chinese counterparts specific areas in which there are interests, whether they are convergent or they are not convergent, but still the discussions on them are necessary because they are a matter of strategic interest to both countries. So, for example, in Afghanistan, there was a session. On multilateral institution diplomacy, there was a session, which included cooperation on terrorism. Mm-hmm. There was also
Iran,
and the nuclear issues.
That's right.
It was there. The timing was significant one way, not that much of a breakthrough was to be expected, that it was taking place just a week before the Nuclear Suppliers Group plenary session in Seoul. But the important thing again is in the larger context, and that is where you find this kind of signaling and kind of cues being sent across to both sides. And one I'd just like to quote here, that the Foreign Secretary, when he briefed the press, he actually said, and I imagine this was the Indian message to the Chinese side,
yes,
that one thing that we could do together was a more stable, substantive, forward-looking India-China relationship, which would inject a greater amount of predictability into the international system.
Right.
Now that in a way is interesting because the Chinese have a stake in the stability of the system, and there's a bit of hedging going on by everybody, whether it's China versus India or China versus US or India versus China and so on and so forth. So in one way, this dialogue in that sense does represent from the both sides a serious effort to understand each other better. So it is at the official level, then you also have at the think tank level, which again was a very significant dialogue which took place.
But the fact that there had been several other channels through which this kind of meetings had been happening in the past too, 30 more channels of this kind. How does this strategic dialogue, what kind of dimension does it really give to these bilateral meets, Dr. Cholia? And how significant was it, since it seems to be a broader way of, doing this dialogue, as has been, or, different from what has been the practice in the past?
Yes, Shalini, indeed, it's a very institutionalized kind of bilateral relationship, as it should be, because we share over 4,000 kilometers of our disputed boundary, and we are neighbors, and we are aspirants to superpower status, both of us. So I think China and India, there is indeed a variety of mechanisms, as you mentioned, and I think the idea was there was a strategic economic dialogue, there was a strategic defense dialogue, and now there is just a holistic strategic dialogue, and then there is a separate channel between the National Security Advisor and Yang Jiechi on that side for the border dispute settlement. So if you look at all these elements, there is clearly I think the basis of all this is a concern that we should avoid war, number one. We should minimize hostilities, number two, and number three, we should coexist even if we don't agree and converge on everything. So I think that is the reason why they have such frequent interactions. To some extent, even military to military exchanges have also started happening between India and China, which were not at all there earlier. So they have been doing some joint exercises on countering terrorism and so on. So I think, I don't know whether they really build confidence, but meeting face to face on a regular basis and then building the base for high level visits and exchanges. Right. All these is meant to be, there's a lot of diplomatic activity between China and India. I mean, the skeptics can say that the end result of it is we don't get much out of it, but that's true. But nonetheless, by engaging continuously, we are showing our intent, both sides, I think, that we want to minimize the the negatives and try and maximize whatever positives we can take.
One of the key things which the Foreign Secretary had said was that the questions of sovereignty must be addressed first. And he also said that the China-Pakistan economic corridor violates sovereignty. Now, how should this be read?
Well, first of all, just to complete what I was saying, that the significance of the dialogue at this level between the two foreign offices is in a way that they bring the strains or the strings of different kind of channels of communication taking place, and there is an overview which is taken where you actually situate all these different channels of communication into, let us say, the context of overall foreign policy towards that country. So that really is the significance in that sense. Now, in one way, it's very interesting that what the Foreign Secretary said, that sovereignty is important. And in a way, it certainly projects a certain, let's say, self-assured posture on our part, that we are actually telling the Chinese that if they object to the Dalai Lama coming to, let's say, the Rashtrapati Bhavan, for example, or if they object to the American ambassador going to Arunachal Pradesh, then they should also take into account the fact that we are going to ask them questions as to why they're building what they call this corridor across the territory which actually belongs to India.
That's right.
So in one way, this is interesting and important, and I would just say that it certainly shows to an extent that degree of convergence that both sides feel that a serious dialogue is necessary between the two sides, because the fluid situation where you explore possibilities, where you can explore each other's mind, that's very important in this kind of a complex relationship, and secondly, you find where you can possibly find cooperation. For example, let me just complete this particular point. For example, the Global Times, when it lambasted the Foreign Secretary and India, saying that India should recognize there is an asymmetric relationship, and this asymmetrical relationship actually has to be the basis for the further growth of our bilateral relations. And then, of course, when the question was, but the two foreign offices, the Indian Foreign Office and Chinese Foreign Office, they both said the dialogue was very useful. So in one way you find this kind of shadow boxing taking place, signaling coming across, but at the same time a formal recognition that this kind of dialogue is important. And I would say why it's important. One, of course, is that even the CPEC, the way it is being conceived, the way the Chinese role is increasing in Afghanistan, when they engage with us, we can actually tell them what the pitfalls are,
right,
where they are going wrong in what they are doing, and then they have to take a view in the overall context, the strategic interest in the region. That if they think that they can proceed with this kind of an, let's say, approach, in that case they may not be able to achieve the objectives that they have in mind. So I think it is really in that context that we have to see. And of course, they all know very well that with the US, our relations are very strong.
You know what, I would also like to understand now, well, Dr. Cholia, the fact that the strategic relationship between these two countries, how should that be defined and how should that be viewed? And is it also changing, evolving with time because of the changes around the world as well as the geopolitical changes?
Yeah, no, I mean, frankly, we have been using this term a little loosely, and we have over 24 so-called strategic partnerships now. So China was signed in 2005. It suggests a greater degree of coordination, especially in military sphere and in the geopolitics. But unfortunately, with China, we have not been able to reach that because there is a degree of competition and suspicion. So I think we should set aside the term. I mean, although it's used, it has no real depth. Rather, I would focus on the basic goal of conflict avoidance and management of the relationship. It's a kind of like a sophisticated way to say we agree to disagree on key issues.
But how can you manage the relationship when the two countries on some issues they don't really meet eye to eye, and you see that that's where the problem begins?
There's conflict come cooperation, right? So that's the dynamic, this complex relationship. So we do manage. For example, unlike the Pakistani side of the border, we don't have bloodshed on the line of actual control with China. So while there's a kind of a push and shove with regards to the disputed points where the Chinese the incursions happen, and apparently we also do it. But at the end of the day, we avoid conflicts because we have this peace and tranquility formula, and the hotlines and all these things. So that's how we manage it. It's been a long time since an Indian soldier or a Chinese soldier actually shot at each other or killed each other, right?
Ambassador
so this
Kumar,
is how
does it make the relationship between these two countries very complex and very difficult even for analysts to understand exactly where these two countries want to resolve those things? Where do they want to take the relationships forward?
I think ultimately all diplomacy is actually about risk taking, really. For us, the relation with China is important because it's a neighboring country. It's a major military and an economic power, and therefore our objective really is to contain the military aspect of that power and to take advantage of the economic power that he has. At the same time, unlike the Soviet Union during the Cold War, the Chinese government, in fact, if you remember, Xi Jinping in the World Economic Forum talked about globalization. The fact of the matter is that they have a strategic interest that the international system remains stable. They want a better share in that, but they still want it to remain stable because their entire economic prosperity is built on the stability of the system. So you find there are many openings that we have, whether it's terrorism, for example, whether it is even Afghanistan, this conversation that took place in Afghanistan, there was agreement that the both sides can explore possibilities of economic common projects or capacity building. So in one way, engaging China, which is again an important power, even as regards Afghanistan is concerned, it has its benefits because we understand each other better as to what they're doing. So I would actually say that this relationship has, on the other hand, for the Chinese, the uncertainty is so much greater because compared to, let us say, the India-China border, their situation East China Sea, the South China Sea is very live. And every other day you find violent confrontations taking place with the US Navy.
That way you think, has India really maintained a decent position there, at least regarding the maritime concerns China has, the disputes that China has on these issues?
Well, we have actually said to the Chinese in very clear-cut terms that the UNCLOS tribunal award, which was on the case the Philippines brought against them, that this tribunal award actually is binding, and they should accept that. At the same time, what we have to actually see is that we talk about freedom of navigation, so do they. But we actually tell them that some of the activities which they're doing actually, in a way, obstruct the freedom of navigation, which they say that their stance does not obstruct, but actually it does. The 9-dash line, for example, which actually, if you draw the 9-dash line, means you cover the entire South China Sea to say it's your sea. In which case, if you want to enter that sea, you enter with their permission. That's what it amounts to. But even the fact that they're doing these kind of structures for military uses in the Spratleys Islands, they actually have the potential to shift the balance of power in the region. So all these activities actually have a destabilizing character. But what I was actually saying was that Chinese realize that in this situation of uncertainty, they cannot pick up fights with everybody around them.
Right.
So to that extent, India actually has a place, and the Chinese realize the value of having a dialogue with us, because they know that if they are picking up fights with everybody around their boundary, their territory, whether on sea or on land, they actually have a very difficult time managing their own affairs.
Okay, let's understand China's stand on Masood Azhar's case, and the fact that China's defense ties with Pakistan had been growing. There had been, in fact, reports suggesting that China would also like to give some submarines and other supports to Pakistan. How do you look at that? Does it really pose a big challenge to India? Should India be thinking of rebalancing this Pakistan-China axis now?
It is a millstone around our neck. I mean, going back in time, and even during the Cold War and even post-Cold War period, they have been the so-called all-weather allies. And in fact, this sensational expose of a internal meeting in Pakistan, where the foreign secretary was briefing the military, he let out, which came out in Dawn, the newspaper. He let out that the Chinese are saying that they are willing to continue to keep the technical hold on this Masood Azhar, but even then their patience is running. So what they're essentially, it's a very coordinated move. Then the technical arguments are actually baloney, because the real reason is they believe that this is how they can maintain pressure on us, you see. And if India is bleeding from terrorism, if Kashmir is not settled, if all these peripheries of India challenge the central government's written authority, the state remains weak, and we cannot rise up to become China's equal. And that is where the Global Times comes in, because this is a hardline wing of the Communist Party, which is saying India should forget aspiring to be our equal and drop this whole dance of parity. Rather, they should know where their place is. They are inferior to us, and they should behave. So what they're trying to say is their whole objective is with us is to block our rise. That's how they do it. So
is trade also an important factor here between India and China, since we know that Chinese economy particularly has gone through a lot last year, and there are concerns of India's manufacturing sector growing, maybe in a way diminishing the role that Chinese exports really play in our market. So is that also a major concern?
See, the balance of trade is still very much in their favor, and we've been raising the alarm bells for years now. And there is an agreement that frankly, we don't probably have enough manufactured goods to be able to compete in the Chinese market right now. But they will try and ease our access to IT, to pharmaceuticals, and possibly textiles. These are areas where we do have some relative strengths. But nonetheless, I think the Chinese have a pretty, it's a very politicized approach to even economic relations. So their logic is that, we will invest $46 billion in a failing country like Pakistan, but not even 1/10 of it in India. So the Chinese investment in India rising, but not very much.
We have also heard the Chinese media reporting on these issues, suggesting that it would be naive for India to tilt towards US in case it wants to take really sides on the US-China trade war issue, especially since there is a change of leadership in the US. How important would this be for these two countries, the change in the leadership in the US?
The change in leadership actually is quite important, but I would actually say, in fact, the point that the Foreign Secretary made in his briefing really was this, that the way Trump was speaking during the presidential campaign, and the way when the testimonies by the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, when they gave the testimony before the Senate for the confirmation, they actually made very strong hardline statements on China, on South China Sea. But when Prime Minister Abe was to go to China, before that, the phone call took place. The phone calls took place with Xi Jinping and Trump, and the call, I mean, as the reports suggest, said that Xi Jinping said he will not take a call from President Trump unless he were to say and then declare publicly that he supports one China policy. So the point actually, in one way you can say that they have seen that US can change its stance. So to that extent they feel happy, I guess, satisfied that this is what's happened.
Okay.
But at the same time, the element of uncertainty is still there, that to what extent can you think that a national leader can change position so quickly. So the point is that the fact that you are changing position rather abruptly injects an element of uncertainty, unpredictability in global international relations. So this is in fact what the Foreign Secretary's point really was, that in an environment, current environment, when the US foreign policy is still in a state of formulation, crystallization, and when you find the personality of the national leader of the United States being what it is as turning out. So how do you actually cope with the growing uncertainty in the international relations?
Okay.
And there I would imagine that the Chinese see a point that India is an important interlocutor for them. They may try whatever things they're trying, but at the same time they know that if India were to, let's say, switch sides and go closer to US. So that's why they're giving the threats to us.
Right.
Like asymmetry, don't try to balance us, and so on and so forth.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is that they understand that if India had a symmetrical relationship, why do they want to talk to us?
The interesting part is that this US, China, India triangle, it has been in news. It's going to be in news, of course, in some, for some more time. It's certainly evolving. But what kind of challenges does it really pose to India?
I think Trump is definitely intending to be more aggressive towards China overall, even though he backed down on the one China policy issue. And I think Trump seems to be also placing greater emphasis on military spending and increasing US military capabilities and so on. So I think overall the Chinese will face greater heat in the coming 4 years. Be it in South China Sea, be it worldwide in global competition. Trump has been saying that we've stopped winning wars and it's time for us to win wars. And one of the indications of this is it looks like on North Korea, which is a Chinese ally and stooge. Trump intends to possibly open dialogue, or although it's been shelved temporarily, and there's a lot of pressure on China to deliver, because China is seen as talking the talk but not walking it on UN sanctions on North Korea and so on. So if you look at the overall regional perspective in Asia Pacific and beyond, I think the Chinese will find a more hostile global environment. Not so much about democracy and human rights, because that used to be the earlier US line about China.
Right.
This is more based on
economy based.
Yeah, and also it's based on trade and the belief that the Americans believe the Chinese are cheating them. And two, it's also based on a more militaristic notion about restoring America's military power and potentially using the military more than Obama did. So all these mean that there are threats to China, and therefore I think it's reason for us to believe that they will be more accommodating towards India, because indeed it is one flank less for them. If they are fighting some kind of a global tussle for supremacy with the United States, they would want us, if not on their side, they obviously will not be on their side, at least not clearly joining the American camp. So that's a kind of we have to maneuver this to our advantage, where the Chinese know that they cannot really go against our core national interests far too long, or else we have the US card that we have to keep playing.
Ambassador Kumar, concluding remarks from you. Is it really going to be very, very challenging diplomatically managing these things in the current situation when there's a lot of volatility in the global scenario too?
I think so. I think, as I said, that the new US administration is still settling down. They're still formulating their policy with respect to many global issues, and therefore this is uncertainty. Whilst US is well disposed towards us, but there are issues which can suddenly erupt, like we know not just the H-1B issue, but even the issue of undocumented immigrants there,
right?
Or the instance of the tragic killing of an Indian national.
Right.
So all of these issues can actually complicate the relationship between the two countries. Now, as I said, the point really is that it is this environment of uncertainty where all sides are in a way hedging. But I think basically the Chinese know that there is a broad strategic convergence even towards them between US, India and Japan. And that is in a way something which actually can hem them in whatever their strategic ambitions are. So I would actually say that this is something, of course, on South Asia and Afghanistan, the US hasn't yet clearly spoken very much. And therefore, we basically have to see how the policy shapes up with regard to Afghanistan, with regard to Pakistan, for example. But that's how actually I think they are going to see as to how things develop.
See, if they help us get into NSG, and if they really genuinely support us for permanent membership of Security Council, I think they will really be able to manage the pressure coming from the US. But if not, then this turmoil will keep on happening.
Fine. On that note, we'll conclude this discussion. Thank you very much for joining me. Well, that's all for today in Public Forum. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.